It was around 1983 when my family took our first trip to Cape Cod. I must have been about 10 or 11 years old. For the first couple of weeks, swimming in the ocean, eating seafood, and having ice cream kept me entertained. But before long, I grew bored. I was an only child and pretty awkward, so I had no one to play with while my parents read, shopped, or did other adult things. One morning during our usual walk along the beach, I spotted a brown bottle with something inside. I ran over, dug it out of the seaweed and broken shells, and got incredibly excited. It was a real message in a bottle. I couldn't quite make out the writing, but I could see a rolled up piece of paper inside. I tried to force the cork out with my small hands, but I couldn't do it. My parents helped me take it back to the rented house. We had to use a knife to carefully chip the cork out. When we finally tipped the bottle upside down, the rolled paper slid out. It took me a while to decipher the awful handwriting, but I eventually read it. The letter was from another kid named Robbie. He said he was bored that summer and had sent several messages in bottles from his dad's fishing boat, hoping for responses. He included an address and asked simple questions. How old are you? What do you look like? What's your name? Are you a boy or a girl? My parents supported the idea of me writing back. The next morning, they took me to buy stationery and helped me with spelling. Suddenly, my summer didn't feel so lonely. Somewhere out there was another boy, just like me, bored and looking for a friend. We mailed the letter as a family. For the next few days, I checked the mail as soon as I woke up. Robbie replied surprisingly quickly. He said I sounded fun and was glad someone had found his bottle. He had started to think they had all sunk or gotten lost. We wrote back and forth all summer. Even after we returned home, we kept in touch. We became friends. He told me about his life, and I told him about mine. We shared secrets, tips for building slingshots, best candy combinations, and bike tricks. It was easier to be honest through letters. He admitted his parents didn't talk to him much, and I told him mine did. But over time, his questions started getting stranger and more inappropriate for kids our age. He asked if I ever looked at boys the same way I looked at girls, and made comments about my body and what I looked like in a swimming suit. When my replies slowed down because of school, he became more intense. He told weird stories about things older boys had done to him and said he thought about me a lot. He said I was his only friend and sometimes imagined playing with me. It began to creep me out. I eventually wrote him a letter saying I was too busy with school and couldn't keep writing. His next letter was angry. The handwriting had changed. It went from a child's sloppy scrawl to a tighter, more adult cursive. He said friends didn't just ditch each other and that we should meet up soon. He claimed he could probably get to my city and suggested we go somewhere alone, like the pier. I left the letter on the kitchen table. The next day, everything changed. My parents found it and immediately called the police. They suspected a predator was targeting their son. The police investigated the return address and discovered I hadn't been writing to a boy my age at all, but to a much older man. When they searched his house, they found letters from dozens of other children pinned all over his walls. He had been leaving messages in bottles on beaches across the country, written with his left hand to disguise his handwriting, then waiting for excited kids to reply. My parents never told me all the details, and I haven't wanted to know everything. While I don't think I ever would have met up with him, there were moments when I really believed Robbie was my friend and felt less alone. All it would have taken was a bad day at school or an argument with my parents for me to consider biking to the pier. What really creeps me out is knowing he always knew where I lived. He didn't live that far away. Sometimes I wonder if he ever parked outside my house or followed me. Even now, as an adult with kids of my own, I sometimes catch myself watching a figure in a parked car, heart racing, until I'm sure they've left. I've always had a philosophy about life. Good people finish last. It only seems like the bad guys end up winning. I don't want to believe it, but unfortunately the world is an ugly place, where the worst kinds of people often claw their way to the top. The only person I knew who really went against that grain was my best friend in high school. Let's call her Lola. She was a bleeding heart empath who always tried to do the right thing. She had the strongest moral compass I've ever seen. I never saw her say or do anything truly bad or mean. She wasn't holier than thou, she was very down to earth, but she maintained what I can only call moral excellence. The story goes like this. One day after school, Lola and I were hanging out on the track. It was one of those days with no practice. We were talking with some other friends when the topic shifted to this guy in our economics class named Albert. He was the kind of kid you knew was labeled a loser the second you saw him. Greasy hair that desperately needed cutting, a patchy beard that always looked like he'd just eaten, and weird anime t-shirts. The only reason I even knew he existed was because he answered questions strangely in class. One time the teacher called on him, and he whispered the answer so quietly no one heard. When the teacher told him to speak up, he screamed, "42!" The whole class went silent. One guy laughed, but the rest of us were just freaked out. One of our friends started making fun of Albert as we walked around the track. Lola got really offended and defended him, saying he wasn't that bad and that everyone is a little weird in their own way. She went on a rant about how we shouldn't make fun of people. Some of the others kept going anyway. Lola got annoyed and left. Since I was closer to her than anyone else there, I went with her. On the way back to the car, she asked me why I had joined in. I tried to explain that I didn't really mean to. It just happens sometimes in the wrong crowd. She said she wanted to be alone, so I walked home. The next day in economics, we had a partner project. I normally worked with Lola, but this time she walked straight over to Albert. He was usually the one left working alone or randomly paired with someone. I was annoyed because I got stuck with one of the laziest kids in class. A couple of times during the period, I looked over and saw them laughing and having a good time. After class, I asked Lola why she had ditched me. She said she felt bad for Albert and that it wasn't right how everyone ignored and roasted him. I told her that was fine, but she shouldn't abandon her own friends just to make the weird kid feel included. She got annoyed and walked off. That was the day she started hanging out with Albert regularly. It was weird. I was honestly kind of annoyed that I was losing my best friend to the weirdest kid in school. I still talked to her when I could, but we didn't hang out as much. Things between her and Albert eventually got strange. She told me he really wanted her to be his girlfriend. After a couple of weeks, she showed me some of the text messages he sent her. They were freaky. He talked about wanting to do weird stuff to her and even bought her a furry costume, a purple fox in a bikini. She tried to pull back, saying he was nice, but way too much to handle. Things got worse when rumors started flying that they were getting married over spring break. Lola insisted nothing had happened and that he grossed her out. But rumors don't care about the truth. Then one day, Albert had his laptop open in class. Looking at pictures of Lola, the girl sitting behind him secretly recorded it. The video was about 40 seconds long and showed him staring at dozens of photos of her. Some from when they hung out, some from Facebook, and at least one taken at school without her knowing. The video spread quickly, and everyone started calling him a stalker. Lola finally had enough. She texted him that she didn't want to be friends anymore, and that she was creeped out by what he was doing. This is why I believe good people finish last. The next day, the news shocked the entire community. Albert had killed himself. No one was more devastated than Lola. She blamed herself, saying she was responsible. She even called 911 on herself because the guilt was so overwhelming. Of course, she never got in trouble. She hadn't done anything wrong. She just didn't want to do weird, furry stuff with him. This all happened during our senior year. It's been about 2 years now. Lola basically dropped off the face of the earth. She stopped talking to everyone and rarely leaves her bedroom. I've reached out a few times, but she doesn't want anything to do with me. The saddest part is knowing she was one of the nicest and smartest people I've ever met. She was only trying to do the right thing. And because of Albert's selfishness, her life might be ruined forever. I know how most of these stalker stories usually go. An attractive young woman and some creepy guy who doesn't get the hint. But I have a stalker story that's probably the most horrifying one I know of. It's the worst story I've ever heard. Not because there's some grand monster, deranged psychopath, cult, aliens, or Bigfoot. It's 100% true, and it happened to people I know and interact with every single day. That's what makes it the scariest story I've ever heard. I have a special needs uncle. He talks a little funny and doesn't quite understand how the world works. We all kind of think of him as a 5-year-old in an adult's body. Physically, he's about 60, very wrinkled, bald and unkempt. You could easily mistake him for being homeless. He's honestly incredibly nice and has a heart of gold. The only thing wrong with him is that he's not mentally functional. He's a little strange too. But I'm not really sure how much of that is unique to him versus his condition. When there's only one mentally handicapped person in your life, they tend to stick out. We call him Uncle Steve. It's been my father's responsibility to take care of him ever since my grandparents passed away, and he's always lived in the house with us. Thankfully, we've had a large enough house that he has his own room, and it's never been too burdensome, at least not from what I remember. Taking care of a mentally handicapped person can be a lot, but it's never felt like too much, if that makes sense. He would ride his bike around our local community and do little errands like picking up things from the grocery store or the local deli. It was pretty nice having that help growing up. But sometimes he would disappear for long periods of time, and we would all worry about him. When cell phones became common, my dad started sending him out with one so we could call him if we got worried. That didn't work out so well. He just wouldn't answer. Maybe he couldn't hear it over the wind while riding. My dad started getting suspicious that he was doing something he didn't want us to know about. I must have been around 17 or 18 at the time. My father asked me to borrow one of my friend's cars and follow Uncle Steve around the community one afternoon, just to make sure he wasn't doing anything bad. I agreed and followed him for hours. The guy literally rode his bike around the local park for 3 hours straight. It was honestly really strange. I guess little activities like that become much more exciting for someone with his mental capacity. I told my dad about it, and he asked me to do it one more time. He promised to pay me $50 and keep it between us. I don't know why he was so suspicious, but I agreed. I followed him just like the day before, but this time, instead of heading to the park, he made a turn I didn't expect. I almost lost him. I slowly followed as he rode down a street I'd never been on before. He stopped in front of one house, parked his bike on the sidewalk, and walked toward the front door. When he couldn't get in, He opened a window and climbed inside. At this point, I was extremely freaked out. I had no idea what to do. Should I call the police? I was afraid someone might hurt him. He was just a mentally handicapped old guy, after all. I could only imagine how terrifying it would be for the homeowners to find him inside their house uninvited. After a few minutes, he climbed back out the window, closed it behind him, got on his bike, and rode away. I drove straight home and called my dad at work. He left immediately. I always hated watching my uncle get disciplined. It made me feel bad for him, even though I knew he needed it. That night, I went out with my friends so I wouldn't have to see it. The next morning, my father told me that Uncle Steve had been institutionalized and that I would never see him again. I was shocked. "You institutionalized him?" I yelled. My dad told me to sit down and then told me something I'll never forget. He had searched Uncle Steve's room before and found a black box full of a girl's hair. He had been breaking into this family's house during the day and stealing things from their daughter. Hair from her pillow, underwear, even used tissues. It was really creepy and disturbing. The creepiest part is that this girl went to the same high school as me. She was only 14 years old. Uncle Steve must have seen her in the community one day and taken a liking to her. I don't know how he figured out where she lived, but he did. And he found a way inside multiple times. My father told me this wasn't the first time. A couple of years earlier, Uncle Steve had become friends with another teenage girl in our community. She spent time with him because she felt sorry for him, but things escalated when he tried to kiss her in front of her parents. The girl's parents threatened to press assault charges, but their daughter talked them out of it. After that incident, my parents tried to keep Uncle Steve on a much shorter leash. You can only control someone like that so much. I wasn't sure what to think when it was all said and done. I feel bad for him, knowing he's going to spend the rest of his life in an institution. But it's also not fair to put young girls at risk for his sake. The reason I find this story so scary is that even the most innocent-seeming people in your life can turn out to be monsters and creeps. That's why it's the scariest story I've ever heard. My brother is 3 years younger than me. He's always been a bit of a goofball who never took anything too seriously, and somehow managed to have more fun than anyone I've ever known. Everything always seemed to work out in his favor. Even when he made horrible mistakes, he usually came out without a scratch. This story happened about 6 months ago. It's really sad, but talking about it helps. My brother and I both ended up at the same college. We live about 20 minutes away from one of the best engineering schools in the state, so it was a no-brainer. Growing up, he was always the popular one with lots of friends, while I was more of a loner. The problem was that his friends were all fake. They only stuck around when things were good and always left his life worse than before. This was the second semester of my junior year. I was taking a heavy course load, trying to graduate early. My brother had graduated high school a semester early, and this was his first semester in college. He was smart enough that he didn't have to study much in high school. But he struggled once college started. We rode to and from school together most days, and occasionally played video games on weekends. Usually Halo 3 on legendary difficulty. That was our nostalgic thing. Somehow he got a girlfriend, I think through Tinder. They started spending all their time together, and he dove in head first. They stopped hanging out with me completely. About 3 weeks into the relationship, he told us he wanted to marry her. My mom tried talking sense into him. My dad yelled at him for being naive and stupid. He was literally a college freshman, and this was his first real girlfriend. Only 2 weeks later, they hit a rough patch. They had a huge fight over who was going to pay for a $12 McDonald's meal. They started arguing over the dumbest things. It was clear how emotionally immature they both were. Like most young relationships, they eventually broke up. But here's the twist. She went back to her previous boyfriend and broke up with my brother. It left him in a really bad headspace. I heard him crying in his room every night for weeks. Instead of getting better, he started hanging out more with the bad crowd I mentioned earlier. High school dropouts and older guys without jobs. Many of them smoked weed, which is illegal in our state, and some used harder drugs. One dealer in the group owned a nice house on Main Street, paid for in cash with drug money. It wasn't long before my brother didn't want to ride to college with me anymore. He said he wanted independence. We slowly drifted apart. I later learned he had stopped going to class entirely and didn't even bother dropping out. Through it all, he still constantly talked about his ex-girlfriend. One day, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went into his room while he was supposedly at class. After searching for about half an hour, I found a folder on his computer named after his ex. Inside were hundreds of pictures of her, some from when they dated, some from Facebook, and others taken at random locations. There were even photos of her with her new boyfriend. Then I found another folder called Edited Pics. What I saw there was horrifying. My brother had gotten very good at Photoshop. He had pasted her head onto adult film stars. Some images were even more disturbing. He had edited his own head onto scenes with her and photoshopped the new boyfriend's head onto a dog watching in the background. I was mortified. I wished I had never looked. 6 months later, he still hadn't gotten his act together. He kept hanging out with those sketchy friends and got addicted to harder drugs. My very caring and forgiving mother eventually kicked him out of the house after catching him with drugs multiple times. I haven't talked to him since. I have no idea where he is or what he's doing now. I still don't fully understand what possessed him to take things that far. Maybe he had an underlying mental illness. Whatever the reason, he's no longer part of our lives. I really hope he's doing better, but I'm not sure I'll ever know. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. My ex-boyfriend betrayed me by giving away all of my secrets to the creepiest person I've ever come in contact with. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This took place about a year ago, and I still have to deal with some of the consequences. I'm a 19-year-old girl and I go to college about 2 hours away from my house. I got a full ride, and in my free time, I made YouTube videos, mostly makeup tutorials. I started when I was 16 or 17 and gradually built up a small following. It wasn't enough to make me a celebrity or anything, but it was enough that I didn't have to work a part-time job outside of college. It was really nice. The only real drawback was that I had a couple of really creepy guys who would always comment on my videos and stalk my online profiles. Thankfully, I didn't use my real name online, and I never shot videos in places that could be recognized or tracked. I met my first boyfriend while I was in college. It was a couple of weeks into our chemistry class, and we ended up being assigned as lab partners. He seemed really nice, and things just went from there. I dated him for the rest of that semester, but a few weeks in, I started to notice that we weren't very compatible. We had extremely different interests and different goals for the future. I tried talking to him about my concerns, but he didn't really care. Most of the time, he wouldn't even talk to me because he was too busy playing video games. The night he told me he'd rather play Fortnite than talk about our relationship problems, I knew I had to break up with him. There was no way this was going to work. Thankfully, we didn't have many classes together, so I figured it wouldn't be too painful. I even planned to drop the sociology class we shared since I didn't really need it. I was already taking way more credit hours than required. I talked to him after class that day and told him I didn't think we were compatible and that we should see other people. He seemed really hurt, which surprised me. I had told him numerous times that there were problems and that I wanted to work on them, but he never made time. Now, all of a sudden, I was the bad guy. If any of you have been in that situation, you know how frustrating it is. I just walked away after saying my piece, leaving him frustrated and upset. He texted me a few times later that day, but I blocked his number. I eventually blocked him on all social media and dropped the class that night. I thought he'd be out of my life for good. Just a few weeks later, I was having coffee at a popular local shop. I had my favorite white chocolate mocha and was casually scrolling through my phone, replying to comments on my YouTube videos. That's when a strange-looking guy in a dark green jacket walked up to me. He stood over me and just stared for a second. I felt his presence immediately, looked up and saw him staring directly at me. I got really intimidated and asked, "Can I help you?" He smiled and said, "You're even prettier in real life." I had no idea what he was talking about. He then told me he was a fan of my YouTube channel. I found this extremely strange, especially since he was clearly a guy who didn't wear makeup. But it was also weird because I had never been recognized in real life before. I only had about 62,000 subscribers. Most of my viewers were American. But with that size audience, the odds of being spotted in public are extremely low. I started thinking about how bizarre it was that some creepy older guy who watched my makeup tutorials just happened to find me in public one day. He reached out and touched my arm, asking if I was a lonely little girl who needed some company. I pulled my arm away, splashed my coffee in his face, and ran to the ladies' room. I waited there for a while and texted some friends to come to the coffee shop and check if he was still outside. They arrived about 10 minutes later and said there was definitely a creepy guy in a dark green jacket still sitting around, staring toward the bathrooms. My stomach dropped. I asked them to talk to the staff and get him to leave. Within a few minutes, they texted me that he was gone. I told my friends the whole story, and they were just as confused as I was. A couple of weeks later, a friend of mine, who was still friends with my ex, saw him bragging about how he had gotten revenge on me. Apparently, he had gone into the comments on one of my YouTube videos, found one of those creepy guys, and messaged him my real-life information. My friend said he made it sound like he had done this with multiple guys, meaning there could be more of them out there looking for me right now. It still really freaks me out and makes me question what kind of monster I had been dating. Who gives out someone's personal information to strangers on the internet like that? I understand he was upset about the breakup, but that didn't give him the right to do what he did. Within a few weeks, I had to move apartments mid-semester, which was extremely expensive. I didn't want to risk one of those creepy guys showing up at my place, especially since my ex knew exactly where I lived. I've done my best to protect myself, but I still worry. After that experience, I don't tell anyone about my small YouTube channel. Even though it's grown since then, I haven't been recognized in public again, and I really hope it stays that way. I'm a 21-year-old male college student. I attend a local community college and live at home. Our property is pretty big, so the driveway is a long walk from the house itself. We usually throw our garbage into cans right outside the house. And on garbage day, I have to haul them all the way down to the road for pickup. It's a bit of an inconvenience, but it beats having to drive everything to the dump like some of my friends do. As a college student, I don't exactly have the healthiest sleep schedule. I sleep when I'm tired and stay awake when I'm not. Sometimes I get schoolwork done at 3 a.m., other times in the afternoon after class. My horror story starts with me taking the garbage down late at night. I almost always forget to bring the cans down until the night before, usually around 11 p.m. or even later. That means I'm making multiple trips back and forth in the pitch black, carrying heavy garbage cans. I've always liked horror stories, but I don't consider myself someone who scares easily. Neither the dark nor the night bothers me much. I've had a few moments where I heard strange noises or thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, but nothing serious. Until last summer. It was about 2 a.m., and I was moving a really heavy can full of kitty litter. We have 5 cats, so you can imagine how bad it smelled. The can was at least 70 pounds. The wheels had fallen off long ago, and the handle sometimes rips off if you pull too hard. I got about halfway down the driveway when the handle broke. The whole can tipped over, spilling at least a third of its contents onto the driveway. I cursed under my breath and stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. My best idea was to sweep it all back into the can, so I started walking back up the driveway to get the broom. I didn't make it far before something made me stop and turn around. I had this strange feeling that I was being watched. I looked toward my neighbor's house and noticed a light on. In all the times I'd taken the garbage out at night, I had never seen this neighbor up that late before. I was pretty sure it was an older man, at least 60. The light was on the second floor, probably his bedroom window. His house sits on the other side of the road, about 10 feet back from it, so there was a decent distance between us. I stood there staring at the window, feeling really freaked out that someone else was awake and watching me. What possible reason could he have for being up at 2 a.m.? I couldn't see him clearly, but my heart dropped when I saw him move away from the window. The way he moved made me think he had been standing there watching me the whole time. He didn't turn off his light right away. I tried to convince myself he was just an old man I had accidentally woken up by dropping the can. I got the broom, swept the kitty litter back into the can, and brought it down to the road. Still, I felt his eyes on me the rest of the night, even after he turned his light off. That was the night everything changed. From then on, every time I took the garbage down, whether it was 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., he was there watching. I even started mixing up the times, but it didn't matter. He was always at the window. Around this time, I also noticed we had a different garbage man. The old one used to throw the cans and lids on the ground sloppily. This new guy always put the lids back on neatly, which made my life easier. At first, I thought it was a pleasant change, until I realized something much worse was happening. I started getting really freaked out and asked my parents what I should do. They told me I was just being paranoid and that he was probably a bored, retired old man with nothing better to do. But no matter how bored someone is, who goes out of their way to watch their neighbor take out the trash? This continued through the rest of the summer and into the next semester. During fall break, I decided to turn the tables. My bedroom window faces his house, so I grabbed a pair of binoculars from the basement. After bringing the garbage down at 4 a.m. one night, I sat by the window and watched him. He left his bedroom light on, but just sat there. After about half an hour, I started getting sleepy. I was ready to give up when I saw him leave the room. No other lights turned on in the house. About 40 seconds later, I noticed the garbage cans were gone from the curb. I waited and watched. A few minutes later, the old man came out of his house carrying our garbage cans. He placed them back exactly where they had been. I waited another 40 minutes until his bedroom light went out, then rushed down to check them. They were completely empty. That's when it hit me. We never had a new garbage man. This guy had been stealing our trash and emptying it inside his own house for who knows what reason. It made me sick. I started driving our trash straight to the dump to avoid putting the cans out. After a couple of weeks of that, the old man seemed less active around his house. I've been too scared to confront him directly, and I still have no idea what he was doing with our trash. It freaks me out to this day. I'm a 22-year-old woman living in a typical small American town. I own a small house right across the street from my parents, and the rest of my family lives within a mile. We're all really close, and I like it that way. Our family is well connected in the local community, which has its good sides and its bad ones. Small town gossip can be brutal, and I've been on the receiving end of it enough to know it really sucks. There's this one guy in my community who has a reputation for being a creep. We went to the same high school, but he was 2 grades ahead of me. We never interacted back then. But one day, he messaged me on Facebook asking if I was single. As a woman, I knew exactly what he was after. All I knew about him was that a lot of people considered him creepy. I'm not usually one to buy into rumors, but where there's smoke, there's usually fire. I ignored his message. That prompted him to message me 4 more times, asking why I had read it and not replied. Eventually, I told him I wasn't interested in dating him. He called me sexist for assuming men only want one thing, and tried to claim he just wanted to be my friend because he'd heard I was funny. I decided to play along and accepted his friend request. We talked a couple more times on Facebook Messenger. He actually had some interesting thoughts about movies and local gossip. We didn't chat regularly, but whenever we did, he was always the one initiating. I already had enough friends and was close with my family, so I didn't really need anyone else. A couple of weeks later, he spotted me in Walmart. He said hi and asked to take a selfie together. Of course, he posted it to Facebook and tagged me for the whole town to see. There we were in front of the cucumbers, him with a goofy grin and me with a very obvious fake smile. He commented on his own post, tagging me again, saying I looked so beautiful with heart eye emojis. That's when I officially started to feel freaked out. Somehow he got my phone number and started texting me. By this point, I was really uncomfortable, but I also felt a little bad for him. He seemed to have no friends, and his family had a reputation for being heavy drinkers and misfits. I asked how he got my number. He admitted he had messaged one of my friends on Facebook and asked for it. That was the moment I realized how sneaky he was. I asked my friend Alexis why she gave it to him. She said she thought it was fine because we had public pictures together on Facebook, the Walmart selfie, of course. I was frustrated, but didn't block him right away. I know now that I should have. I stopped responding to most of his messages and only replied when he double texted. He started getting the hint and messaged less. Until one day he sent me a random picture. It was a photo of me at our local car show. He had clearly been across the street taking it without me knowing. He wrote that I looked beautiful and wished I would talk to him more. I ignored it, but it kept happening. He would message or text me pictures of myself in random places. Stopped at a red light, coming out of the dentist, walking around town. I knew something was seriously wrong and told myself I needed to go to the police. The final straw came when he sent a picture of me playing Guitar Hero with my sister. We were inside her living room. He must have been across the street, zooming in through the window. When I saw that photo, I dropped my phone and screamed. I told my dad everything. He immediately asked why I had let it go on for so long. I explained I just wanted it to stop. He told me to block the guy everywhere and then went over to his house that night. I don't know exactly what my dad said, but I haven't heard from him since. After this experience, I never talked to anyone I don't know well, especially on social media or through texting. It's way too easy for someone to become obsessed. I still see this creep around town sometimes, but thankfully he doesn't even look in my direction anymore. This is probably the worst stalker story I know, but it didn't actually happen to me. It happened to my aunt. Throughout my cousins and my time in school, there was never enough funding for the humanities. If you know anything about public school budgets, you know almost all the money goes to sports, especially football. There were very few opportunities for students to pursue art, music, or other creative projects. My family is very artistic, and all of my cousins and I are girls who focused on music and art rather than sports. Year after year, there wasn't enough money for supplies for us, but there was always plenty for the football team and cheerleaders. When I was in high school and some of my cousins were in middle and high school, my aunt finally had enough. She decided to run for the school board to make sure students could pursue the humanities. She was friends with the woman who held the position before her, who was retiring and agreed to endorse her. My aunt won the election fairly easily. Once on the board, she worked hard to be fair to all students. She didn't slash the football budget in half or anything drastic. She just tried to distribute resources more evenly. Many coaches and football dads didn't take kindly to this. There were regular fights at school board meetings, and they started painting her as anti-football. Some coaches even called her anti-American. Despite the chaos, she stood her ground. She served on the school board for about 10 years. The job didn't pay much, but she made sure students had opportunities beyond football and cheerleading. After a couple of years, she decided she wanted to work inside the school system instead. There was an opening for head administrator at the high school, and she was well qualified for it. Accepting the position meant she had to resign from the school board due to a conflict of interest. One coach in particular, who had called her anti-American, had said many nasty things to her over the years. He told her she wouldn't win her last election before taking the administrator job. She went out of her way to prove him wrong, won the election, and then resigned 3 weeks later. This infuriated him. It finally got to him. During her first week on the job, she went out to the parking lot and found her car with smashed windows and slashed tires. The security cameras malfunctioned that day, so there was no evidence. But everyone knew it was him. There were other incidents too, things going missing from her desk and little sabotages to make her life harder. He even accused her of deliberately messing with a student's file, the backup quarterbacks, to get back at him by changing his grades. I'm still surprised the whole ordeal lasted as long as it did. I have no idea how this guy was allowed to remain a teacher and coach. Throughout it all, my aunt regularly received death threats and hate mail at least once a week. He used different fonts and email addresses to make it look like it came from many people, but the similarities were obvious. It finally came to a head about 2 years later. My cousins, my aunt, my mom, and I were all at the house one day after school, packing the minivan to go to the local swimming pool. A truck I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. My aunt yelled at all of us kids to get inside the house. I heard screaming, but she didn't tell us what happened that day. It would be years before I learned the full story. The coach had been sending her anonymous threatening messages on her phone. My aunt had started carrying her handgun. She had a carry permit. When he got out of the truck and began walking toward her, she pulled her gun on him. He stopped, turned around, and drove off. She reported the incident to the school system, and he was fired without much resistance. I don't know what he's doing these days. I just hope it's somewhere far away from football and children. When I was 22, I started seeing a guy I met on a dating app. His name was Hunter. We went on 4 dates over the span of a little more than a month. At first, things seemed all right. Our first date was a quick coffee meetup, less than an hour, just a screening to make sure he seemed normal. Our second date was at a nearby bar for drinks. We both got a nice buzz and had a good time. Our third date was dinner, and that's when I started questioning things. I wasn't sure if I really clicked with his personality or if something felt slightly off. The date ended with a kiss. The first and only time we ever kissed. I convinced myself that because I let him kiss me, the date had gone well. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that we went on our fourth and final date. We went out for drinks again, but this time I went into it with a less excited mindset. I paid more attention to his little quirks and realized some of his mannerisms gave off antisocial and borderline creepy vibes. He started drinking way too much. He also got really touchy-feely at the bar, trying to kiss me multiple times. I'm not a fan of PDA, especially at a bar with people sitting right next to us. I politely turned down his advances. A few minutes later, I mentioned I was tired, heavily implying we should leave. He asked for the check, paid, and we grabbed our coats. As we were walking to our cars, he stopped me and bluntly asked if we could go home together. I said, "Not tonight. I'm tired and I have work tomorrow," which was a lie. He kept pushing, saying he'd drive me to work tomorrow and other things. I found it absurd, drunk or not. I also wasn't comfortable with him driving home drunk. I decided right then that I wouldn't see him again. I went to my car in the parking lot across the street and started driving home slowly. I wasn't drunk, but I was still cautious and overly alert. That's probably why I noticed the same car behind me after I made at least 3 turns. At a stoplight, I realized it looked like Hunter's car. I texted him, "Are you following me?" He replied almost immediately, "Yes, I just want to make sure you get home okay." I called him, but he wouldn't pick up. This was so weird and creepy. I pulled over and texted him to stop following me. I was fine. He stopped in the middle of the street for a second, then drove off. He didn't text back until I was home and in bed. His message said, "I hope I didn't weird you out tonight. Sorry I got so drunk. Next time we should do something more low-key, like dinner at my place or something." I didn't reply. The next morning he followed up with, "Oh no, is the vibe dead?" Less than 2 hours later, he sent just a question mark. I decided to respond before it got worse. "Hey, I had a great time getting to know you, but I just think our personalities don't click that much. I also really want to focus on myself right now. I hope you understand." That's when the angry texts started. The worst one was, "No, I don't understand. You strung me along for 4 dates just to tell me that. How about you pay me back half of everything I bought for you?" There were other angry texts that included personal information, so I won't share them. But they were bad enough that I blocked him. I thought that would be the end of it. But then I started getting non-stop, no caller ID phone calls. I ignored them until they finally stopped. The next day, when my parents weren't home, I got back from work to find a bouquet of flowers on the stoop with a card. It was an apology from Hunter asking for a second chance. He somehow knew where I lived. In his mind, he must have thought this would come off as charming or sweet. In reality, it was extremely alarming. I sent him one final text telling him to please not contact me anymore and never come to my house again, or I would file for a restraining order. I kept his number blocked so I wouldn't see his response. I thought it was over, but I was wrong. Not long after, I was home alone for the night. My parents' house is big, and I have a loft bedroom on the highest floor. I woke up in the middle of the night to noises downstairs. At first I wasn't sure, but then I clearly heard a door opening upstairs. Nobody was supposed to be home. Even half asleep, I immediately thought, intruder. I crawled out of bed, slid under it, and called 911. I texted my family asking who was home. I heard noises from another bedroom. Then my bedroom door opened, and footsteps came up the carpeted stairs. There was silence at the top. Then I heard the drawers next to my bed opening. I held my hands over my mouth to muffle my breathing, my heart racing. I heard a man's voice mutter, "God damn it," under his breath. It sounded like Hunter. I stayed completely still and prayed my phone wouldn't make any sounds. He rummaged through my entire dresser. Then the bed shifted as he sat down on it. I could see the outline of 2 shoes through the bed skirt. He sat there for 2 or 3 minutes before getting up, muttering "fucking" under his breath. He closed the drawers, walked back down the stairs, and left. I called 911 for real and stayed under the bed until the police arrived. I met them at the front door. They did a sweep of the house. Every window was unlocked, and one dining room window was big enough for someone to crawl through, though it was hidden behind bushes. I gave a statement and got a report number. When my parents came home the next day, we went to the police station together. They said they would investigate, but without solid proof, it was him inside the house. It was difficult. The case lost momentum. I did successfully get a restraining order against him. I was advised never to accuse him directly of breaking in or contact him again. Thankfully, he hasn't. But from that point until I moved out of my parents' house, I was always uncomfortable, constantly worried he might be creeping around outside. Even today, I sometimes fear he might find out where I currently live. I was in the 6th grade when this happened. It all started during the week of Halloween when I stayed after school to help decorate a haunted house for my school's Halloween carnival. I often got to stay late and fool around with some of my friends while helping decorate, and we were rewarded with pizza afterward. Along with my friends, there was another kid who also stayed late. I'll call him Chris. We got along the entire time we were helping after school, and he never once gave me a reason to feel uneasy around him. He was genuinely a funny and cool kid. Fast forward about 2 weeks. I was suddenly approached by a group of girls in my grade who all had wide grins on their faces. I asked what was going on, and they excitedly told me I had a secret admirer who would be texting me that night. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least curious. I really wanted to know who it was. Later that night, just as I was getting ready for bed, I got a notification from Messenger. It was the only app I had at the time, and I mostly used it to communicate with my parents whenever I was home alone. The message was from Chris. I had completely forgotten that I had added him on Facebook around Halloween. I opened the message and it read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." Concerned, I quickly replied, "Yeah, what's going on? Everything okay?" To this day, I wish I hadn't answered. The typing bubbles appeared and stayed there for what felt like forever. Nearly 2 minutes passed before his message finally came through. I wasn't expecting what came next. In one long paragraph, he confessed his love for me and said I had been driving him crazy ever since Halloween. He explained how he had tried to impress me during recess with his soccer skills, but that I never seemed to notice him. He said he was growing tired of being ignored, and the message ended with, "I want you to notice me, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" I cringed at every word. I stared at the message for a long time. What the hell? I barely even knew this kid. I tried to come up with a way to let him down gently because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I told him I didn't like him that way and that I just wanted to be friends. I could tell immediately that he didn't like my answer. He kept asking why, and I had to come up with different explanations until he eventually stopped responding. The next morning was a nightmare. Some of his friends came up to me and told me Chris wanted to kiss me, something he had apparently told the entire grade. They also said he would do it even if it meant cornering me. I took that as a threat. I decided to tell my teacher, who told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and said that if Chris ever got close to me, I should run straight back to the classroom. That wasn't enough for me. I reported him to the principal, who told me he would handle it right away. That gave me some relief. I should mention that I lived right across the street from my school and everyone knew this, including Chris. Later that week, I was walking home from school. I hadn't even been inside my house for more than 2 minutes before I heard someone knocking on the front door. I peeked out the window just in time to see someone ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have been following me. My mom opened the door to find a piece of paper on the ground. It was addressed to me. I read the note out loud. It said there was a surprise waiting for me under the Cadillac in my driveway, which belonged to my brother at the time. My mom went to check, but there was nothing there. However, after that day, my brother's Cadillac stopped working. I still have no idea what Chris did to it, but my brother was eventually forced to sell it. Unfortunately, my nightmare didn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends, who told me to give him a chance and that he would treat me right. There was even a moment when I caught Chris taking a picture of me walking home. I only noticed because I heard the sound of an iPhone camera behind me. Who knows how many photos he had of me? Every morning, I would wake up to messages from him saying things like, "I can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." The harassment and stalking were getting worse, and I was becoming afraid for my safety, especially now that he knew where I lived. Eventually, I was called into the counselor's office. I felt relieved, thinking she would tell me Chris was going to get in trouble or that the police would be involved. Instead, what she said was worse. She told me, "Boys will be boys." She said boys do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be upset about it. She said I should feel flattered because this kind of thing was normal. According to her, the only thing I could do was accept it and learn from it. At the time, I didn't understand how wrong that was. I genuinely believed her. Looking back now, it's disturbing that a school counselor would tell a 6th grade girl being stalked and harassed that it was a compliment. That afternoon, I told my mom everything. She was furious. That same week, my mom came with me to the principal's office again. I'll never forget what she said. "What are you waiting for? For something bad to happen to her before you do something?" Neither the principal nor the counselor responded. They just sat in silence. Before leaving, my mom told the counselor she was never to speak to me again unless she was present. Unfortunately, I don't think Chris was ever punished. To this day, that still makes me angry. He essentially got away with everything. But it still wasn't over. One night, my parents were out shopping while I stayed home. I was getting ready for bed when I heard something hit my bedroom window. Then it happened again and again. It sounded like someone was throwing rocks. My heart started racing. I got up and pulled back the curtain. Chris was standing in the yard, holding rocks, looking up at my window. He somehow knew exactly which room was mine. He was about to throw another rock when he saw me. I ran through the house, checking every door and window. Thankfully, everything was locked. When I returned to my room, I had 4 messages from Chris. "Why did you leave?" "I just want to talk." "I'm sorry. All I wanted was a kiss. Please forgive me." Then one final message. "You're not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him. Thankfully, I never had another incident like that again, even though I still saw him throughout the rest of my school years. From 6th grade until senior year, the last thing I heard was that he had been arrested. God only knows for what. The saddest part of this story is that a school counselor told an 11-year-old girl that being stalked and harassed was a compliment and something she should learn from. I just hope she no longer works with children. I want to stay as anonymous as possible with this. This was a very serious occurrence that I still have PTSD from, and unfortunately, it scarred me. I'm changing all towns and names in the story, so there's no way it can be traced back to me. I've been a very reclusive person most of my life. It started at a young age. Even in my early school years, my teachers would tell my parents I had antisocial behavioral problems. I was even placed in special 20-minute classes for speech and behavior in elementary school. At the time, I didn't understand why I was being taken out of class while everyone else wasn't. Middle school was when the pressure of the social environment really started to set in. Kids began forming friend groups, and that carried into high school and only got worse. I never had learning disabilities or anything like that. I just had social issues, which have improved as I've gotten older. I still consider myself an awkward, introverted person, but I've made close friends, and I'm grateful for that. But now let's talk about girls. Of course, being socially reserved comes with challenges when it comes to dating. Honestly, without getting too graphic, I'll just say it affected my early experiences. I lost my virginity at 21, which I know is a bit late. This part of my story takes place when I was 23. I had already moved out of my parents' house and had been working a high-paying job in my field for a couple of years. I bought a townhouse in my hometown. It was fairly affordable, but still large and nice. 2 floors. It was the kind of place that would impress someone at 23. One day, while swiping on Tinder, I matched with a pretty decent-looking girl. I'll call her Emily. We went on a first date at a nearby restaurant. I was in my head a lot, thinking she was judging me or that I was acting awkward. And by the end of the night, I felt like she would never want to see me again. But when I got home, she texted me saying she really liked me and had fun. I was ecstatic. We went on a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th date, and things honestly felt great once I got out of my head. We became boyfriend and girlfriend fairly quickly, but the honeymoon phase didn't last. At first, when you start seeing someone, you get excited every time they text or call. You crave the attention because it feels mutual. But slowly, I started feeling like she was texting me too much, at all hours of the day. She would ask where I was, what I was doing, and sometimes get upset if I took too long to reply. She would call or send question marks to follow up. One day, while we were on the couch, she insisted we share our locations with each other. I wasn't thrilled about it, even though I had nothing to hide, but I agreed. A couple of months into the relationship, things started to go downhill. She began asking why I was at my friend Phil's house and not answering her texts. It got so bad that one Friday night, while I was at Phil's house with him and our friend Mark, she actually showed up at the house. Phil's mom ended up walking her downstairs. She didn't hide how angry she was. She raised her voice at me, almost yelling, asking why I was goofing around at Phil's house, instead of responding to her messages about going to a winery the next day. I told her we could talk about it later, but she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside. We argued in the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I told her no. We both drove separately, and I told her not to follow me. When I got home, I sent her a long message telling her I needed space and that we should take a break. In hindsight, I should have done it in person, but I was honestly scared of her reaction. She immediately started calling and texting me repeatedly. When I stopped responding, she began pounding on my front door and ringing the doorbell non-stop. It got so bad that my neighbor came out and told her to leave. I could hear her screaming at him, calling me names. Eventually, she left. The next day, I removed location sharing. Almost immediately, she started blowing up my phone, clearly upset that I had turned it off. That confirmed for me that I needed to end things. My final message was that I was sorry, but I had to block her because she was scaring me. She surprisingly didn't show up again that night. But about a week later, I went to Phil's house again and stayed late with the guys. I left around 11 p.m. and went home shortly after. I wasn't tired, so I made some food, sat on the couch, and started browsing streaming apps for a movie. While the microwave was still running, I heard a click or thud from the dining room. The house was a loop layout: kitchen, dining room, living room, den, separated by walls. The den and dining room were divided by a door. I muted the TV. Then I heard it again. The door between the dining room and den clicked open. I walked into the dining room, my heart sinking. That door was always kept shut. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and called 911 immediately. I spoke loudly so whoever was in the house could hear me. The operator told me to wait outside if possible, so I went out and waited. Police arrived quickly. We searched the entire house: closets, crawl spaces, underbeds, attic, but found nothing. The officer told me to call again if I heard anything, and I tried to settle down. Later that night, I went to bed but woke up to several messages from Emily. She was apologizing and begging to talk, repeatedly asking if I was awake. I responded, telling her she needed to stop contacting me and that I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. Seconds after I sent it, I heard a scream from the closet next to my bed. The closet door burst open. Emily was inside. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway. I managed to slam the bedroom door shut, but she started stabbing through it with a knife. One of the stabs cut me. In shock, I told her I loved her and begged her to stop. She froze for a moment. While still on the phone with 911, I convinced her to drop the knife. She did. I opened the door, tackled her, and held her down until police arrived. They forced the door open and took her into custody. She was arrested and later convicted on serious charges. I never wanted my name attached to any of this, and I've been careful not to include identifying details. This was one of the most traumatic nights of my life. Even now, it still affects me. I'll never forget it.